Some people spend their lives trying to become great. Others spend their lives trying to escape comparison. Because perhaps one of the heaviest burdens a human being can carry is following someone unforgettable. The parent everyone admired, the leader everyone trusted, the sibling everyone compared you to, the mentor who seemed impossible to replace. Because how do you step forward when history keeps looking backward? How do you lead when someone else already became legend? And perhaps no biblical figure understood this burden more painfully than Joshua. Joshua, history remembers him boldly, the conqueror, the warrior, the man who led Israel into the promised land, the leader after Moses, strong, faithful, courageous. But perhaps history moves too quickly again. Because before Joshua became leader, he was simply a man standing in the shadow of someone enormous, someone impossible. Moses. Pause there, because names matter, and Moses was not merely respected. He was legendary. The man who challenged Egypt, split the sea, spoke with God, old millions, survived wilderness, a prophet, a liberator, a symbol. Imagine growing up near someone like that, working beside someone like that, learning under someone like that. How would comparison not feel overwhelming? Because perhaps Joshua quietly carried a terrifying question many people secretly ask. What if I am not enough for what comes next? Many people understand this fear. The child inheriting family, business, the employee replacing beloved boss, the younger sibling living inside impossible expectations, the parent trying not to fail children the way others once succeeded. Comparison changes confidence, especially when greatness stands close. And Joshua lived close to greatness. Very close. He watched Moses closely, walked beside him, learned from him, served him. But perhaps serving greatness feels safer than replacing greatness. Pause there, because leadership feels different once responsibility becomes personal. It is one thing to stand beside a strong person, another thing entirely when people suddenly turn toward you, waiting, expecting, needing answers. And perhaps Joshua knew this fear deeply, because before leadership, there was uncertainty. Before courage, there was hesitation. Before confidence, there was shadow. Imagine the moment. Moses gone. Pause there. Gone. The voice guiding people suddenly silent. The man holding nation together no longer there. And suddenly, everyone looks somewhere else. Toward Joshua. Can you imagine emotional pressure? Millions wandering. Fear everywhere. Enemies ahead. Uncertainty surrounding. And one impossible thought whispering, why me? Psychologists understand something important. People stepping into massive responsibility often experience something called imposter syndrome, the terrifying fear. Everyone thinks I belong here, but what if they are wrong? What if I fail? What if I disappoint everyone? What if I cannot become who people need? Could Joshua secretly carry this fear? How could he not? Because replacing greatness often feels terrifying, especially when comparison never stops. Imagine people whispering, Moses would have known what to do. Moses spoke differently. Moses was stronger. Moses understood better. Leaders following legends constantly face this pressure, not becoming themselves, trying desperately to become someone impossible. This still happens constantly today. The child trying to live up to successful parent, the athlete replacing superstar, the employee inheriting impossible expectations, the pastor after beloved pastor, the leader after visionary founder, people silently asking, how do I fill shoes bigger than me? And perhaps Joshua's story matters because he never fully begins as obvious hero. He begins as follower, student, servant, the man standing behind legend, quietly watching, quietly learning. quietly wondering if courage could ever become enough. Still, something fascinating already lived inside Joshua. Faith, perhaps. Loyalty, perhaps. Maybe simply endurance. Because years earlier, when fear spread through Israel, Joshua stood differently. Others saw giants. Joshua saw possibility. Others saw impossibility. Joshua still believed. Pause there. This matters. Because courage rarely means absence of fear. Courage often means moving while afraid. Psychologists understand this deeply. The bravest people often feel fear intensely. They simply refuse fear final authority. Could Joshua feel afraid? Absolutely. Could he still move forward? That becomes story. Because somewhere between fear and responsibility, something changes inside people. Not instantly, not perfectly, but gradually. The uncertain person slowly becoming capable. The anxious person slowly becoming brave. The follower slowly becoming leader. And perhaps that is why Joshua feels painfully human. Because many people secretly stand exactly where he once stood, between old chapter and new chapter, between safety and responsibility, between fear and purpose, waiting, unsure, wondering, I really enough for this? Tonight, we uncover story of one of Scripture's most overlooked struggles. Not merely war, not merely conquest, but pressure, identity, fear, leadership, and terrifying responsibility. The servant who became successor, the follower who became leader. The man chosen to replace a legend, or perhaps a frightened human being, learning courage, one impossible step at a time. This is the story of Joshua, the man chosen to replace a legend. And before this story ends, you may begin wondering whether courage ever truly begins with confidence, or whether the strongest people simply learn how to walk forward while still afraid. Some people are born into greatness. Others grow up near it. And strangely, growing up near greatness can sometimes feel heavier. Because greatness inspires, but greatness also intimidates. Especially when comparison quietly enters the room. Especially when people begin asking impossible questions. Can you become anything more than the person standing beside someone extraordinary? Because perhaps one of the hardest emotional battles humans face is learning who they are while standing in someone else's shadow. And perhaps nowhere in Scripture feels more psychologically human than the early life of Joshua. Because before Joshua became leader, he was follower. Before command, service. Before confidence, observation. And before history knew his name, he was simply the man standing beside Moses. Moses. Pause there. Because Moses was not ordinary leader. He was legend. Imagine trying to build identity beside someone like that. The man confronting Pharaoh. The man speaking to God. The man parting sea. The man whose name people whispered with awe. How do you stand near someone extraordinary without quietly feeling smaller? Many people understand this feeling deeply. The younger sibling beside successful sibling. The child growing up beside brilliant parent, the employee working under famous leader, the student beneath gifted mentor, the friend beside charismatic personality. People silently wondering, will anyone ever notice me? Or harder still, can I ever become enough? Because comparison changes identity. Psychologists understand something painful. Humans naturally measure themselves against nearby greatness. Not distant greatness. Nearby greatness. The person in same room. Same family. Same workplace. Same story. And Joshua lived beside greatness constantly. Imagine years beside Moses, watching miracles, watching leadership, watching impossible responsibility, the crowds listening, the authority, the certainty, the presence. Moses did not simply lead. Moses carried history, and Joshua watched everything. Pause there. This matters enormously, because identity often forms through proximity. People absorb confidence, fear, wisdom, expectation. Children learn from parents. Students learn from teachers. Followers learn from leaders. Joshua likely admired Moses deeply. How could he not? But admiration sometimes quietly becomes intimidation. Psychologists recognize something important. The people inspiring us most sometimes become people making us doubt ourselves most. Not intentionally, but comparison grows naturally. Imagine Joshua privately, watching Moses speak boldly, meanwhile asking silently, "Could I ever do that?" Watching Moses lead millions, meanwhile wondering, "Would anyone follow me?" Watching Moses speak with confidence, meanwhile fearing, "What if I fail completely?" Many adults secretly live inside this exact struggle. The employee succeeding, yet secretly afraid of never matching predecessor. The child growing beside successful parent, feeling invisible. The younger leader constantly compared to older leader. Psychologists call this comparative identity pressure, the burden of becoming yourself while standing beside someone larger than life. Could Joshua quietly struggle this? Very likely. Still, Joshua was not merely observer. He served, loyal, close, faithful. The scriptures repeatedly show Joshua nearby, near mountains, near tents, near moments of leadership, not center stage. Nearby, this feels psychologically important. Because service shapes people. People serving greatness often develop humility, patience, awareness. Yet service can also create hidden insecurity. The assistant wondering, "Am I capable without them?" The follower wondering, "Who am I if they disappear?" This still happens constantly. The child depending emotionally on parent, the employee depending on mentor, the partner depending on stronger personality. Sometimes people feel safe in supportive role, until suddenly, responsibility arrives, and responsibility changes everything. But before that, something important happens. Joshua faces fear early. Pause there, because perhaps Joshua's identity begins forming through one surprising moment. The spies. Israel standing near promised land. 12 men sent ahead. The mission simple. Observe, return, report. And suddenly, fear spreads. The land terrifying. The enemies enormous. Giants, cities, impossibility. 10 spies panic. The people panic. Fear becomes contagious. Pause there, because fear always spreads faster than courage. Psychologists understand this deeply. Humans naturally follow anxiety. Worst-case thinking feels safer. Negative emotions spread rapidly through groups. And Joshua responds differently. Alongside Caleb, he believes Caleb. Not because danger disappears, because possibility still survives. This matters enormously, because courage rarely means lacking fear. Joshua likely saw same giants, same danger, same impossibility, yet chose different response. Psychologists call this resilient cognition, the ability to see challenge without surrendering entirely to hopelessness. Could Joshua already possess quiet strength? Perhaps. Still, the people reject courage, choose fear. 40 years wandering begin. Imagine emotional frustration. You believe, you trusted, yet everyone suffers anyway. Many people understand this pain too. The person trying to move family forward, the leader watching others resist growth, the employee carrying vision while others stay afraid. Sometimes courage feels lonely. And perhaps Joshua quietly learns something painful. Leadership often means standing differently, even when misunderstood. This shapes identity deeply. Still, Moses remains center. Joshua remains beside. Years pass. Decades pass. Imagine what Joshua witnesses. Conflict, complaints, leadership pressure, miracles, failure, anger, exhaustion. Perhaps somewhere quietly, Joshua learns something else. Great leaders struggle too, because people often romanticize greatness. Yet Joshua likely saw Moses privately, tired, burdened, frustrated, overwhelmed. This matters psychologically. Mentorship humanizes greatness. The closer people stand to heroes, the more human heroes become. Joshua may slowly realize leadership is heavier than it looks. This still happens constantly. Children eventually realizing parents struggled too. Employees realizing bosses feel insecure too. Students realizing mentors feel pressure too. Greatness often hides exhaustion. Could Joshua secretly fear leadership because he understood cost? Possibly, because proximity reveals reality. And perhaps nowhere feels more intimidating than one terrifying truth. Moses would not live forever. Pause there. Imagine emotional weight. The legend disappears someday. Then what? Who leads? Who decides? Who carries burden? Who faces enemies? Could Joshua quietly dread future? Likely. Many people fear exactly this moment. The parent aging, the mentor retiring, the boss leaving, the role suddenly becoming yours. And suddenly, excitement disappears. Only pressure remains. Psychologists recognize something called anticipatory inadequacy. The fear, he cannot become what comes next. Could Joshua secretly carry this fear for years? Very likely. Still, something fascinating grows quietly inside him too. Capability. Not dramatic. Quiet. Years observing leadership builds wisdom. Years serving builds resilience. Years surviving wilderness builds endurance. Joshua may not feel ready, yet readiness quietly grows. Anyway, this matters deeply, because humans often mistake confidence for preparation. But confidence usually comes later. Preparation happens quietly, long before people notice, long before responsibility arrives. The quiet years matter. The unnoticed years matter. Perhaps Joshua's greatest strength came not from sudden bravery, but slow formation, watching, learning, failing, enduring. And maybe this becomes a universal lesson, because many people secretly stand where Joshua once stood, living beside greatness, feeling intimidated, feeling overlooked, feeling unready, wondering, will I ever become enough? Yet perhaps greatness nearby does not exist to diminish people. Perhaps greatness nearby prepares people, quietly, slowly, painfully, because somewhere ahead, Moses will die. The shadow will disappear. The crowds will look elsewhere. And Joshua, the quiet servant standing nearby for years, will suddenly face terrifying realization. Nobody else is stepping forward, because sometimes the moment terrifying us most becomes the moment revealing who years of hidden preparation quietly created. Before Joshua became conqueror, before Jericho, before leadership, before history remembered his name, he was simply a man learning how to stand between fear and responsibility. And perhaps that matters more than people realize, because great leaders rarely begin feeling ready. Most begin uncertain, watching, learning, quietly wondering whether courage can somehow grow large. Not enough for impossible expectations. And perhaps nowhere in Scripture feels more psychologically human than Joshua's identity. Because Joshua was many things at once: warrior, servant, follower, believer, and perhaps most importantly, reluctant successor. Not reluctant because he lacked loyalty. Reluctant because responsibility felt terrifying. To understand Joshua, we must first understand something uncomfortable. People often misunderstand leadership. They imagine confidence, natural charisma, fearlessness. But psychologists increasingly recognize something surprising. Many strong leaders begin deeply uncertain, especially thoughtful leaders, especially people understanding responsibility honestly. Because people recognizing consequences often hesitate more. Could Joshua quietly hesitate? Perhaps more than history remembers. Imagine his life early. Born slave, pause there. This matters enormously. Joshua did not grow up powerful, did not grow up secure, did not grow up privileged. He was born inside oppression, Egypt, bondage, generational suffering. Imagine childhood shaped by fear, watching people work under harsh systems, hearing stories of suffering. The emotional atmosphere heavy. Children growing up around instability learn quickly. Safety feels fragile. Freedom feels uncertain. Psychologists understand something important. Childhood environments shape nervous systems deeply. Children raised around danger often become alert, practical, resilient, quickly adaptive. Could Joshua develop quiet toughness early? Very likely, because hardship often matures people early. Still, Joshua experiences liberation, the Exodus. Imagine emotional impact, the sea splitting, the impossible becoming real, freedom arriving, hope exploding, and somewhere inside, identity begins changing, the slave suddenly becoming free man. This matters psychologically. Freedom sounds beautiful, yet freedom often feels confusing too. People leaving survival mode, struggle identity. Who am I now? What do I do with freedom? Many adults understand this deeply. The person leaving toxic relationship, the child escaping hard home, the survivor rebuilding life. Freedom creates uncertainty too. And perhaps Joshua quietly begins growing inside uncertainty. Then, something interesting happens. Joshua becomes warrior. Pause there, because this feels important. One of Joshua's earliest major moments comes through battle. Israel attacked. The Amalekites threatening. Joshua leads military response. Not Moses. Joshua. Imagine emotional pressure. The former slave suddenly responsible for lives. Responsibility changes people quickly. Psychologists understand this deeply. High responsibility often accelerates maturity. Fear no longer optional. Action necessary. Could Joshua feel terrified? Probably. Yet something powerful emerges. Competence. Warriors learn something essential. Courage rarely means feeling fearless. It means moving despite fear. This matters because Joshua likely felt danger intensely, yet still stepped forward. Many people misunderstand courage. They imagine confident people, but psychologists increasingly understand. Fear and courage coexist. Sometimes the bravest people feel fear strongest. They simply refuse surrender. Joshua may fit this pattern perfectly. Still, warrior becomes only part of identity, because Joshua also serves deeply, loyally, years beside Moses, observing, listening, learning. This matters enormously, because Joshua's leadership grows through service. Not spotlight, not fame, quiet service. The scriptures repeatedly show Joshua near Moses, at mountains, near sacred spaces, close enough to learn, yet rarely center stage. Can you imagine emotional experience? Watching greatness daily, learning leadership indirectly, sometimes inspired, sometimes intimidated, quietly asking, could I ever become enough for something like this? Many people understand this hidden struggle. The assistant behind great leader, the child beside admired parent, the employee under extraordinary mentor. Watching greatness inspires, yet comparison quietly hurts too. Psychologists recognize something called shadow identity. Living near powerful person sometimes delays self-confidence. People define themselves through proximity. Who am I without them? Could Joshua quietly wrestle this question? Likely. Still, something fascinating appears repeatedly. Joshua stays faithful. Pause there. Faithfulness feels underrated in modern world. Everyone admires charisma, vision, talent, but faithfulness, quiet consistency. People overlook it. Yet psychologists increasingly recognize something important. Long-term trust builds extraordinary competence. People staying close long enough absorb wisdom deeply. Joshua watched everything. Moses' strengths, Moses' failures, leadership pressure, human weakness, spiritual responsibility. Perhaps Joshua quietly learned something terrifying. Leadership costs more than people realize. Because greatness from distance feels glamorous. Up close, heavy, lonely, exhausting. Could Joshua secretly fear leadership because he understood burden? Possibly. And perhaps nowhere reveals Joshua more deeply than the spies. 12 enter land. 10 panic. Joshua stands differently. Not naive, hopeful. Not blind, courageous. Pause there. What made Joshua different? Psychologists might answer. Perspective. Fear exists, yet meaning feels larger than fear. Resilient people do not deny danger. They interpret danger differently. Joshua saw giants, yet believed possibility still existed. This matters enormously, because resilient people rarely feel safest. They simply believe difficulty is survivable. Could Joshua already possess unusual resilience? Perhaps. Still, the people reject hope. 40 years wandering begin. Imagine emotional frustration. You believe, you trusted. Yet consequence arrives anyway. Sometimes life punishes courage too. Many people secretly understand this grief. Doing right thing, still suffering. Trying hard, still delayed. Believing, still waiting. Joshua waits decades. Pause there. Decades. This matters psychologically. Waiting shapes identity profoundly, especially long waiting, especially delayed purpose. Many adults quietly live here, feeling capable, yet unseen, prepared, yet overlooked, ready, yet still waiting. Could Joshua quietly wonder, will my moment ever come? Likely. Psychologists recognize something painful. Delayed recognition often creates self-doubt. People begin questioning, maybe I misunderstood purpose. Maybe I am not enough. Maybe nothing changes. Still, Joshua remains faithful, learning, serving, quietly growing. This feels deeply human, because perhaps Joshua's greatest years looked ordinary. No fame, no spotlight, just consistency. Showing up, learning, enduring. Many people underestimate hidden preparation. The years nobody notices. The quiet seasons. Yet psychology repeatedly confirms. Competence grows quietly, slowly. Experience builds identity. And perhaps nowhere feels more emotionally revealing than Moses' death. Pause there. The impossible finally happens. The legend disappears. The voice of certainty gone. And suddenly, everyone turns toward Joshua. Can you imagine emotional pressure? Millions waiting, enemies ahead, history watching, comparisons unavoidable, the terrifying question whispering, what if I fail? Psychologists call this succession anxiety, the emotional burden of replacing someone extraordinary. Could Joshua feel overwhelmed? How could he not? And yet, something fascinating happens. Joshua steps forward anyway. Pause there again. This matters. Because courage rarely arrives after certainty. Courage often arrives before certainty. People wait to feel ready. Most meaningful moments happen before readiness. Joshua likely felt afraid, unqualified, uncertain. Yet responsibility arrived anyway. This still happens constantly. The new parent, feeling unprepared. The leader promoted suddenly. The adult caring for aging family. Life rarely waits for confidence. And perhaps Joshua becomes deeply relevant here. Because he was not born obvious hero, not naturally larger than life, not legend immediately, just faithful, prepared quietly, terrified perhaps, and willing to move anyway. Could Joshua feel reluctant? Absolutely. Could reluctance make him wiser? Possibly. Psychologists increasingly notice the people doubting power often carry power responsibly, because awareness creates humility. Fear creates caution. Thoughtfulness creates wisdom. Perhaps Joshua's hesitation made him stronger, not weaker. And maybe this becomes one of deepest truths about leadership. The best leaders are not always loudest. Sometimes, the best leaders are simply people brave enough to keep walking forward, even while quietly wondering if they are enough. Because somewhere ahead, a river waits, a nation waits. Impossible responsibility waits. And Joshua, the warrior, the servant, the reluctant successor, will finally face terrifying truth. Sometimes history chooses people long before those people feel ready to choose themselves. There are moments in life when fear feels reasonable. The first day leading a team, the first time becoming parent, the first day after losing someone holding everything together. The moment responsibility becomes yours, and suddenly nobody stands in front of you anymore. Only behind you, watching, waiting, expecting answers. Because perhaps one of the heaviest burdens humans carry is leadership after loss, especially when the person before you felt impossible to replace. And perhaps nowhere in Scripture feels more emotionally human than Joshua standing at the edge of the Jordan River. Because this was not simply geography, not simply travel, not simply military strategy. This was pressure, expectation, fear, the terrifying moment when a follower becomes leader. And suddenly, there is nowhere left to hide. Pause there, because Moses is gone. Gone. The voice of certainty. The leader people trusted. The man carrying history. Gone. And now, the people look elsewhere. Toward Joshua. Imagine emotional pressure, honestly. Millions wandering for decades. Generations dying in wilderness. People exhausted, frustrated, fearful. And now, a younger leader steps forward. Not Moses. Joshua. Can you imagine whispers? Will he be enough? Can he lead? What if he fails? What if we fail again? This still happens constantly today. The child inheriting family responsibility. The employee replacing respected leader. The younger pastor after beloved pastor. The new CEO after visionary founder. The adult suddenly caring for family after parent dies. People silently asking, can I carry what someone stronger once carried? Psychologists call this succession pressure, the emotional burden of stepping into role already shaped by greatness. Because comparison becomes unavoidable. Moses did miracles. Moses spoke with God. Moses split seas. And Joshua Joshua likely felt painfully ordinary by comparison. Could he secretly wonder? What if people expected too much? What if I disappoint everyone? What if I am not Moses? Pause there, because perhaps that last question matters most. What if I am not them? Many people secretly carry this fear, trying to become someone else instead of learning who they are. The child trying to become parent, the employee copying mentor, the leader imitating predecessor. Psychologists understand something painful. Comparison destroys confidence quickly, especially during transition, especially when people feel observed. And Joshua, everyone watched. The stakes enormous. The promised land finally visible. After generations waiting, after years of suffering, after 40 years wandering. Now, everything rests on him. Imagine emotional exhaustion before even beginning. Leadership anxiety often begins exactly here. The feeling, too much depends on me. Psychologists increasingly recognize something important. Responsibility overload activates fear intensely, especially thoughtful people, especially people understanding consequences deeply. Could Joshua feel afraid? Of course. Only careless people feel no fear. Thoughtful leaders feel weight, and perhaps that is why one sentence repeats constantly: be strong and courageous. Pause there again. Notice something fascinating. Why repeat courage so often? Because fear existed. People rarely repeat encouragement unnecessarily. Nobody tells fearless people, do not fear. The repetition reveals emotional reality. Joshua needed courage repeatedly because fear stayed nearby. Could Joshua wake afraid? Could anxiety follow him? Could self-doubt whisper constantly? Very likely. This feels deeply human, because many adults secretly stand exactly where Joshua stood. The business owner feeling unqualified, the parent afraid of failing children, the leader privately terrified, people outwardly strong, internally asking, what if I am not enough? And perhaps nowhere feels more terrifying than the Jordan River itself. Pause there. The Jordan. Water separating wilderness from promise, yet also separating safety from responsibility. Crossing meant commitment. No turning back. Leadership works similarly. There comes moment people stop preparing and start deciding. No more observing. No more standing behind mentor. Now, you move first. Imagine Joshua standing there. The river ahead. The people behind. History pressing. Expectation crushing, and perhaps one impossible thought whispering, if I fail, everyone suffers. Leadership fear often sounds exactly like this. Psychologists recognize something called anticipatory burden, the fear of future failure before anything begins, the nervous system, imagining disaster constantly. What if this goes wrong? What if I disappoint people? What if I destroy something important? Many competent people secretly struggle this, especially caring people, especially responsible people. And Joshua cared deeply, which perhaps made fear heavier. Still, something extraordinary happens. The priests step into water. Pause there, because this moment feels psychologically profound. Faith moves before certainty, not after. The river does not part immediately. Feet enter first. Can you imagine emotional tension? Step. Nothing changes. Another step. Still uncertainty. Another step. Then, water moves. This matters enormously, because humans often wait for certainty before movement. Yet meaningful moments rarely work this way. People say, E will move once fear disappears. E will lead once confidence arrives. E will trust once guarantees appear. Yet psychology increasingly confirms confidence often comes after action, not before. Joshua likely felt afraid crossing, yet moved anyway. This still happens constantly. The person applying despite insecurity. The parent trying despite fear. The entrepreneur starting despite uncertainty. Courage rarely feels dramatic. Usually, courage feels terrified. Still moving, the people cross. The impossible becomes reality. Imagine emotional shift. For first time, Joshua leads successfully. Perhaps confidence grows slightly. Maybe hope enters. Maybe fear loosens grip. Yet leadership pressure remains. Because crossing river solves nothing permanently. Promise always comes with challenge. Jericho waits. Enemies wait. More uncertainty waits. Leadership anxiety never fully disappears. Psychologists understand something difficult. Success rarely erases insecurity instantly, especially for anxious leaders. People often assume, once successful, confidence arrives. Not always. Many successful leaders secretly still fear failure, still question themselves, still feel pressure. Could Joshua secretly remain uncertain even after victory? Likely. This matters because modern culture misunderstands confidence. People think brave people feel fearless. Reality feels messier. Brave people often feel fear intensely. They simply refuse letting fear become final decision maker. Joshua may embody this perfectly. Still, leadership loneliness grows too. Pause there. Because nobody talks enough about loneliness in leadership. Once responsibility increases, isolation often increases too. Fewer people understand pressure. Fewer people share burden equally. People expect answers, direction, strength. Joshua likely understood this quickly. The follower once supported by Moses, now carrying responsibility himself. Many adults understand this loneliness deeply. The parent, nobody parents anymore. The manager, nobody comforts. The leader, everyone depends on. The strong friend, secretly tired. Leadership often feels lonelier than people imagine. Could Joshua quietly miss Moses constantly? How could he not? Mentorship gone, safety gone. The shadow disappeared. And suddenly, he must become person others lean on. This transition feels emotionally brutal. Still, something fascinating changes slowly. Joshua stops asking, "Can I become Moses?" and begins asking, "What kind of leader can I become?" Pause there. This matters enormously. Healing from comparison begins exactly here. Not imitation, identity. Psychologists recognize something beautiful. Healthy leadership emerges when people stop copying greatness and begin embodying their own strengths. Joshua would never be Moses. Different personality, different gifts, different style. And perhaps that was point, because history never needed second Moses. History needed Joshua, the quiet servant, the reluctant leader, the fearful man, learning courage through responsibility. This still matters deeply, because many people secretly waste years trying becoming someone else. The perfect parent, the perfect leader, the perfect successor. Meanwhile, their real strength waits underneath comparison. And perhaps Joshua whispers something powerful to anyone feeling overwhelmed. You do not need absence of fear to lead. You need willingness to move despite fear. Because somewhere ahead, walls wait. Enemies wait. History waits. And Joshua, still afraid perhaps, will soon discover terrifying truth. Sometimes impossible expectations become the exact thing teaching ordinary people they were stronger than fear first. Suggested. Some walls stand in front of cities. Others stand inside people. Fear, doubt, trauma. Impossible expectations. The voice whispering, "You are not enough for this." And perhaps nowhere in Scripture feels more symbolic, more controversial than Jericho. Because people often remember the story simply. A miracle. Walls fall. Victory comes. Faith triumphs. Simple, clean, inspiring. But real human stories rarely feel that simple. Because beneath Jericho lives something deeper. Leadership pressure, fear, war, moral discomfort, the terrifying burden of carrying responsibility when outcomes affect everyone. And perhaps nowhere does Joshua feel more human than standing before impossible walls. Jericho. Pause there. Imagine the moment honestly. The Jordan crossed. The people watching. Expectations growing. The first major obstacle finally appearing. And not small obstacle. Massive walls. Protected city. Military strength. Fear standing visibly in front of everyone. Can you imagine Joshua emotionally? The nation expects success. History pressing. Moses gone. And now, impossible city stands waiting. Perhaps somewhere quietly. Fear returns, because success does not permanently remove insecurity. Psychologists understand this deeply. Lone victory rarely cures fear, especially for people carrying responsibility. The leader still worries, still imagines failure, still feels pressure. Could Joshua secretly wonder, what if this is where everyone realizes I am not enough? Many people understand this feeling. The first big presentation after promotion. The first family crisis after becoming parent. The first real challenge after taking leadership. The moment proving ground arrives. And suddenly, confidence feels fragile again. This matters enormously, because humans often assume faith removes fear. But perhaps faith and fear coexist more than people realize. Joshua likely saw danger clearly. Walls intimidating. Enemy prepared. No obvious military advantage. Still, something strange happens. God gives unusual instructions. Not military strategy. Not siege plan. Not attack formation. Walk silently around city. Pause there. Can you imagine hearing this? Honestly, you are leader. People already unsure. The city intimidating. And strategy sounds absurd. Walk quietly for days. Then shout. Imagine explaining this to nation. Imagine soldiers reacting. Silence. Confusion. Private doubt. Psychologists understand something important here. Leadership becomes hardest when certainty disappears, especially when leaders must trust something others do not yet understand. Could Joshua privately struggle trust? Very likely. Many responsible people understand this burden, making decisions without guarantees, leading without certainty, choosing direction while privately afraid. This still happens constantly. The business owner risking future, the parent making impossible decisions, the leader acting without perfect answers. Courage often feels uncertain. Still, Joshua obeys. Pause there. This matters. Because obedience under uncertainty feels psychologically difficult. Humans prefer control, evidence, predictability. Yet Jericho offers none. Just repetition. Walking, waiting, silence. Psychologists increasingly recognize something fascinating. Repetition under uncertainty tests emotional endurance deeply. People grow restless quickly, anxious quickly, doubtful quickly. Could soldiers quietly question leadership? Probably. Could Joshua feel pressure growing daily? Certainly. Imagine day 3. Still no walls moving. Still uncertainty. Day 5. Nothing changing. Day 6. Still impossible. Can you imagine internal anxiety? The leader silently wondering, what if nothing happens? Many people secretly live here too, trying, praying, waiting, doing difficult things without visible progress. The marriage still struggling, the healing still slow, the career still uncertain. the fear still present. Psychologists understand this exhaustion. Humans struggle delayed outcomes. We want reassurance quickly. Jericho becomes emotional endurance test. Faith without immediate evidence. This feels deeply human. Still, day 7 arrives. The shouting begins. And suddenly, the walls fall. Pause there. Can you imagine emotional release? Fear breaking, pressure releasing, the impossible becoming possible. For Joshua, perhaps something changes internally too. Maybe confidence grows. Maybe fear loosens slightly. Maybe leadership finally feels survivable. Yet, here comes controversy. Pause there again, because Jericho feels morally uncomfortable for many modern readers. War, destruction, judgment, death. Questions emerge quickly. Could violence ever feel justified? How should modern people understand ancient warfare? Was Joshua a faithful conqueror or troubling military leader? This matters enormously, because honest conversations require discomfort. Many people avoid difficult biblical questions, yet avoiding complexity weakens understanding. Psychologists understand something important. Humans struggle moral ambiguity. We prefer heroes, villains, clear certainty. But history rarely offers simplicity. Joshua becomes deeply controversial exactly here, because leadership inside violent world feels complicated. Ancient survival often involved warfare. The historical context brutal. Nations fought constantly. Security fragile. Violence tragically normal. Still, modern readers feel tension, and perhaps they should. Because moral discomfort matters. It reminds humans violence carries weight. Could Joshua himself carry emotional burden? Possibly. Leadership during conflict rarely feels emotionally easy. Modern veterans understand this deeply. The burden of responsibility, the cost of decisions, the invisible emotional consequences. Psychologists increasingly study moral injury, the emotional struggle following painful necessary actions. Could Joshua quietly wrestle responsibility? We cannot know fully, but human leadership often carries hidden emotional cost. Still, something fascinating appears. Joshua does not lead like reckless conqueror. He repeatedly seeks direction, waits, listens, responds. This matters, because perhaps Joshua's greatest strength was never confidence, dependence. Pause there. Many leaders fail exactly here. Power creates arrogance. Success creates certainty. Yet Joshua repeatedly recognizes limitation. Perhaps fear actually protected him. Psychologists increasingly notice this paradox. Thoughtful leaders often lead better because they feel responsibility deeply. Fear creates caution. Humility creates listening. Could Joshua's insecurity partly make him wiser? Perhaps. Still, Jericho teaches another painful truth. Victory creates pressure too. Imagine after walls fall. Everyone celebrates. The impossible happened. Now, expectation grows. Success becomes new standard. Psychologists understand something difficult. Success often increases anxiety, because now failure feels more dangerous. The leader thinks, what if I cannot repeat this? Many successful people understand this secretly. The artist after first hit, the entrepreneur after first success, the leader after first victory. Fear whispers, what if next time fails? Could Joshua quietly feel this pressure? Likely, leadership anxiety rarely disappears. It changes shape. Still, Jericho becomes symbolic too, because perhaps biggest wall was never city. Perhaps biggest wall stood inside Joshua. Fear, comparison, self-doubt, the belief he cannot carry this. And somehow, step by step, the wall begins falling. Not instantly, slowly, through action, through uncertainty, through courage repeated despite fear. This matters deeply, because many people today face Jericho too. Not ancient cities, personal walls, addiction, fear, trauma, imposter syndrome, grief, the impossible thing standing between present and future. And often, the wall feels enormous. Psychologists increasingly recognize something hopeful. People underestimate cumulative courage. Repeated small actions matter. One difficult conversation, one therapy appointment, one honest decision, one brave step. Jericho reminds people, sometimes impossible things change slowly, until suddenly, still, the controversy remains. Faith and violence, leadership and moral complexity. Joshua refuses easy categories. Hero, perhaps. Complicated human. Certainly, because meaningful, leadership rarely feels simple. And perhaps Joshua leaves modern people with haunting question. Can someone lead faithfully inside morally difficult circumstances without losing humanity? Because somewhere ahead, more battles wait, more pressure waits, more difficult decisions wait, and Joshua, the fearful leader, learning courage, will soon discover something painful. Sometimes victory outside does not fully silence battles still happening inside. History loves simple heroes, the brave leader, the righteous warrior, the faithful servant of God. Simple categories feel comforting, easy, clean, but real human beings, especially leaders during violent times, rarely fit simple categories. And perhaps nowhere in Scripture feels more morally uncomfortable than Joshua, because depending on who reads his story, Joshua becomes two completely different people. To some, he is hero, faithful, courageous, the man trusting God despite fear, the servant completing what Moses began, the leader helping people finally reach promise. But to others, Joshua feels troubling. Warrior, conqueror, commander in violent conflict, a man associated with destruction. And perhaps the real controversy begins here. Was Joshua a faithful hero, morally difficult leader, shaped by brutal world? Pause there, because honest conversations require emotional maturity. Especially biblical conversations, especially when stories feel uncomfortable. Many people want certainty immediately. Good guy, bad guy, hero, villain. But psychology and history rarely work this way, especially with leadership, especially leadership during chaos. To understand Joshua fairly, we must first understand context. Pause there, because context matters enormously. Joshua lived in ancient world, violent world, unstable world, empires rising constantly, conflict everywhere, nations fighting for land, survival, security. Modern readers often forget this. Ancient life rarely offered peaceful diplomacy like modern expectations. Imagine. Survival itself often depended on military strength. Still, context explains. Context does not erase discomfort. This matters, because emotionally mature people hold complexity. The violence still feels difficult. The moral questions still matter. Could modern readers struggle with Joshua? Of course, and perhaps they should, because difficult stories force difficult reflection. Psychologists understand something important. Humans naturally resist moral ambiguity. We prefer certainty. Simple heroes feel emotionally safe. Simple villains feel emotionally safe too. Complex people make us uncomfortable. Joshua feels complex. Could he be faithful and morally difficult to modern eyes? Possibly both. Let us ask harder question. What kind of person becomes military leader after 40 years wandering? Pause there. Joshua did not grow up chasing conquest. He grew up oppressed, born slave, raised in instability, watching fear, learning survival, then decades wandering wilderness, years of uncertainty, responsibility growing slowly. Psychologists understand something fascinating. People shaped by prolonged hardship often become deeply duty-driven, especially people surviving collective suffering. Could Joshua see conquest as responsibility rather than ambition? Very likely. This matters enormously, because motivation changes interpretation. Joshua does not appear obsessed with glory, not power-hungry, not empire-building for ego. He repeatedly appears duty-focused, burdened perhaps, responsible perhaps. Could leadership feel heavy rather than thrilling? Likely. Many leaders secretly understand this. People imagine leadership feels empowering. Sometimes leadership feels terrifying. The parent making painful family decisions, the military officer carrying responsibility, the CEO protecting livelihoods, the pastor carrying community grief. Leadership often means impossible choices. Not perfect choices, impossible Yonas. Still, the battles remain morally difficult. Pause there, because people ask fair questions. Why violence? Why destruction? How should modern humans understand these texts? Different people answer differently. Some view Joshua through historical judgment language. Some view stories symbolically. Some emphasize ancient warfare context. Others remain deeply uncomfortable. And perhaps discomfort itself matters. Psychologists increasingly recognize something beautiful. Discomfort creates moral reflection. The fact modern readers struggle violence may actually reflect emotional growth, compassion, empathy, sensitivity to suffering. This matters, because honest readers do not rush complexity away. Still, let us ask psychological question. Could Joshua carry emotional burden? Imagine leading people into repeated conflict, watching fear, responsibility everywhere. The weight of decisions affecting thousands. Could emotional pressure build? Certainly. Modern psychology increasingly studies moral injury, the invisible emotional burden leaders carry after painful decisions, especially when no perfect outcome exists. Many veterans understand this. Medical workers during crisis understand this. Leaders during disaster understand this. Sometimes responsibility hurts. Even necessary responsibility hurts. Could Joshua privately wrestle emotional cost? Perhaps. Scripture often feels quiet emotionally, but human experience suggests leadership leaves marks, especially leadership under violence. Still, Joshua repeatedly shows something fascinating. Dependence. Pause there. He asks direction, waits, listens, seeks wisdom. This matters enormously, because morally dangerous leaders often stop listening. Arrogance grows, power corrupts, certainty hardens. Joshua repeatedly appears cautious, dependent, aware perhaps of limitation. Psychologists recognize something interesting. People aware of their limits often wield responsibility more carefully. Fear sometimes protects leaders from recklessness. Could Joshua's hesitation partly make him safer? Possibly. Still, another criticism emerges. Was Joshua simply a tool of violence? Pause there. Hard question. Fair question. Modern readers naturally wrestle stories of conquest. Yet perhaps something important matters. Joshua's identity feels deeply tied to promise. Land, survival, future, belonging. Remember, Israel wandered decades, homeless, unstable, generational uncertainty. Could entering land feel emotionally enormous? Absolutely. Many refugees, immigrants, displaced people understand longing for home deeply. Joshua may not see conquest as expansion, perhaps restoration. This matters psychologically, because perception shapes morality. Still, complexity remains. No simple answers. Perhaps that honesty matters most, because many people secretly fear complexity. Yet maturity often begins exactly there, holding tension, holding discomfort, holding competing truths. Joshua may have genuinely trusted God and still participated in morally difficult realities. Both truths can coexist. Humans contain contradiction constantly. Modern leaders too. The doctor making painful medical choice. The parent choosing between difficult outcomes. The politician navigating imperfect systems. Leadership rarely offers perfect options. Usually, only painful responsibility. This feels deeply human. Still, let us ask different question. What kind of leader was Joshua emotionally? Psychologists notice something revealing. Joshua repeatedly returns to courage language, fear language, strength language. Why? Because perhaps fear never disappeared fully. Could Joshua quietly remain anxious? Possibly. Could insecurity follow him? Likely. This matters because confident appearance often hides private struggle. Many strong leaders secretly fear failure constantly, fear disappointing people, fear consequences, fear responsibility. Joshua may understand this deeply, and perhaps this changes controversy entirely. Instead of warrior without doubt, maybe Joshua was thoughtful leader navigating impossible world. Faithful, yet human. Strong, yet uncertain. Courageous, yet still afraid. Could this make him more relatable? Perhaps. Because humans rarely need flawless heroes. Humans need honest humans. People struggling responsibility. People learning courage. People trying to lead imperfectly inside imperfect world. Still, modern people wrestle. Bigger question too. Can faithful people ever participate in morally difficult systems? Pause there. This question still matters. The soldier of conscience, the leader in broken institution, the parent making impossible family choice, the employee inside flawed company. Humans constantly navigate imperfect realities. Joshua's story may feel uncomfortable because it mirrors humanity itself, trying imperfectly, leading imperfectly, carrying responsibility imperfectly. Still, one thing feels undeniable. Joshua stayed faithful to responsibility. Not perfect, not uncomplicated, but committed. And perhaps that becomes one of deepest lessons. Faithfulness does not always look emotionally comfortable. Sometimes faithfulness looks complicated, heavy, morally exhausting. And perhaps Joshua leaves humanity one haunting question. Can someone live faithfully inside difficult circumstances without becoming hardened by them? Because perhaps the most dangerous thing about power was never responsibility itself. Perhaps the danger was losing humanity while carrying it. And somewhere ahead, Joshua's greatest battle may no longer involve enemies outside, but something quieter, itching, legacy, and terrifying question every leader eventually faces. Did my courage actually matter? What if Joshua lived today, not carrying sword, not marching through wilderness, not standing before Jericho, but here, now, inside modern pressure, modern careers, modern expectations? Would we recognize him? Or would he simply look like someone quietly overwhelmed beside us? Because perhaps the uncomfortable truth is this: the modern world is full of Joshuas, capable people, responsible people, thoughtful people, people others trust. Yet, secretly, people terrified they may not be enough for what everyone expects from them. Because maybe Joshua never disappeared. Maybe he simply changed clothes, changed language, changed responsibilities. But the fear stayed exactly the same. Imagine modern Joshua growing up. Responsible child, quietly dependable, the kind of kid teachers trust, parents rely on, friends lean on, not loudest person, not most dramatic, but reliable, observant, loyal, the kind of person naturally stepping in when things become difficult. Psychologists recognize this pattern quickly. Children growing up around instability often become responsible early, especially children witnessing struggle, especially children learning. Someone has to hold things together. Could modern Joshua grow up carrying responsibility too soon? Very likely. The child helping younger siblings, the teenager mediating family conflict, the young adult quietly becoming emotional support for everyone else. This shapes identity deeply, because responsibility becomes personality. People praise them. You are mature. You are dependable. You are strong. Beautiful compliments. Yet, underneath, pressure quietly grows, because responsible people often secretly fear failure more intensely. Why? Because so many people depend on them. Could Joshua quietly feel this? Almost certainly. Still, perhaps biggest modern struggle arrives later. Success. Pause there, because success often creates fear too. Imagine modern Joshua entering workplace. Talented, reliable, learning from respected mentor, the legendary boss, the admired founder, the leader everyone trusts, and Joshua, standing nearby, learning quietly, watching greatness closely. Sound familiar. Psychologists recognize something called proximity pressure. Standing near extraordinary people sometimes inspires, yet also intimidates. The closer people stand to greatness, the easier comparison becomes. Could Joshua quietly think he could never become that? Many people understand this feeling deeply. The employee under brilliant manager, the assistant to visionary founder, the child beside successful parent, the younger sibling following impossible example. People secretly wondering, will anyone ever trust me like they trusted them? Am I enough for this? This becomes huge psychologically, because perhaps Joshua's biggest modern struggle would not be lack of ability, but imposter syndrome. Pause there. Imposter syndrome. The fear. Everyone thinks I belong here, but secretly, what if they are wrong? Psychologists increasingly recognize this phenomenon, especially among capable people, especially thoughtful people, especially leaders. The people appearing most competent often privately fear exposure. What if I fail? What if everyone realizes I am not qualified? What if I disappoint people? Could modern Joshua secretly struggle this constantly? Very likely. Imagine moment mentor leaves, retires, steps away. And suddenly, everyone looks at Joshua. Now your turn. Pause there. Can you imagine emotional panic? The person once safely supporting, suddenly becoming responsible. This still happens constantly. The child caring for family after parent, the employee promoted unexpectedly. The new manager replacing beloved leader. The founder inheriting company. The teacher replacing admired mentor. People smiling externally, while internally whispering, I am not ready for this. Psychologists call this role transition anxiety. The fear accompanying major responsibility shifts, especially after admired predecessor. Could Joshua feel trapped by comparison? Certainly, because modern world worships comparison. Social media worsens this dramatically. People constantly measuring themselves against others. The perfect entrepreneur, the charismatic CEO, the confident speaker, the flawless parent. Meanwhile, Joshua likely feels ordinary, thoughtful, quiet, still learning. Still afraid. This matters enormously, because leadership anxiety often hides behind competence. People assume leaders feel confident. Reality feels messier. The leader lying awake at night, the manager second-guessing decisions, the parent terrified of mistakes, the pastor privately exhausted. Could Joshua secretly overthink constantly? Possibly. Psychologists increasingly connect leadership with anxiety, especially caring leaders. Why? Because caring leaders imagine consequences deeply. Who gets hurt if I fail? Who suffers if I decide wrong? Thoughtful people often fear responsibility precisely because they understand stakes. Still, modern Joshua may become incredibly competent too. Pause there. Because anxiety and competence often coexist. People carrying fear often prepare obsessively. Study harder. Work harder. Double-check everything. Many successful people secretly run on fear. Fear of disappointing. Fear of looking incompetent. Fear of failure. Could Joshua become high performer partly because responsibility scares him? Very likely. This still happens constantly. The over-prepared manager, the anxious doctor, the perfectionist business owner, the responsible oldest child, outwardly calm, internally carrying enormous pressure. Psychologists call this high-functioning anxiety. Externally successful, internally exhausted. Could modern Joshua secretly feel tired all the time? Likely, because leadership drains emotional energy, especially thoughtful leadership, especially when people depend on you. Still, another struggle appears: leadership loneliness. Pause there, because nobody talks enough about this. The higher responsibility rises. The lonelier life often feels. Fewer people understand pressure. Fewer people can fully relate. People bring problems, but rarely ask how leader feels. Modern Joshua might understand this deeply. The boss nobody comforts. The parent everyone depends on. The leader secretly overwhelmed. The strong friend nobody checks on. Psychologists increasingly recognize emotional isolation among responsible people. People assume strength means no support needed. Meanwhile, strong people quietly burn out. Could Joshua secretly fear burnout? Absolutely, especially after long seasons carrying others. This matters because Joshua likely carried invisible pressure constantly. Expectations, comparison, responsibility, fear of failure. Many adults secretly live same emotional reality. The pressure to succeed, provide, lead, protect, hold everything together, while privately asking, what happens if I break? Still, something beautiful about Joshua survives too. Courage. Pause there. Not dramatic courage, not fearless courage, quiet courage. The courage showing up despite insecurity, moving despite fear, leading despite self-doubt. Psychologists increasingly redefine courage exactly this way. Not absence of anxiety. Movement alongside anxiety. Modern Joshua may never feel fully confident. And maybe that is okay, because confidence often arrives slowly. Action first, confidence later. This matters enormously for anxious people. Many wait to feel ready before beginning. Joshua whispers something different. Move while unready. Lead while afraid. Take step before certainty. Because readiness often grows through responsibility, not before it. Imagine Joshua today mentoring others, helping younger people, quietly saying, "He was afraid too." Strong people admitting fear changes lives, because many anxious leaders secretly believe fear means weakness. Yet psychology increasingly confirms fear often means care. The people caring deeply usually worry deeply too. Could Joshua become compassionate leader precisely because he struggled insecurity? Very likely, because pain often deepens empathy. Still, perhaps Joshua's greatest modern lesson feels simple. You do not need to stop doubting yourself completely. To become person, responsibility requires. Pause there, because many people desperately need permission to hear this. You can feel afraid and still lead. Feel uncertain and still matter. Feel overwhelmed and still be capable. Feel unready and still grow into role. Joshua likely never stopped feeling pressure entirely. Yet pressure did not stop purpose. And perhaps Joshua leaves modern people with one final haunting question. Are you waiting to feel fearless before stepping forward? While life quietly waits for you to move anyway. Because sometimes the people changing history most. Yuri, simply ordinary people brave enough to continue, even while secretly wondering if they are enough. Most people misunderstand courage. They imagine fearless people, strong people, confident people, the kind of people walking into difficulty without hesitation. No shaking hands, no sleepless nights, no second guessing, no fear. But perhaps one of the deepest lies humans quietly believe is this: if I still feel afraid, maybe I am not ready. And perhaps no biblical story dismantles that lie more beautifully than Joshua. Because Joshua's story never begins with confidence. It begins with pressure, uncertainty, comparison, responsibility, and fear. Lots of fear. Pause there. Because maybe this matters more than people realize. Joshua was not Moses. He knew that. The people knew that. History knew that. He stood in shadow of greatness, the impossible standard, the leader nobody thought replaceable. And suddenly, everything rested on him. Can you imagine the emotional burden? Millions watching, enemies ahead, expectations crushing, and perhaps one terrifying thought whispering constantly. What if I fail? Many adults secretly live inside this exact question. The new parent, the overwhelmed manager, the person rebuilding life after loss, the oldest child carrying family weight, the adult quietly becoming what younger self never felt ready for. People waiting, expecting, needing, and internally, fear grows loud. What if I disappoint everyone? What if I ruin everything? What if I am not enough? Psychologists understand something important. Fear often grows strongest around meaningful things. Pause there. This changes everything. People assume fear means stop, but fear often means importance. The presentation matters. The relationship matters. The responsibility matters. The dream matters. Joshua feared leadership because leadership mattered. Only careless people feel nothing. Only disconnected people carry no weight. Thoughtful people feel pressure deeply. This matters enormously because modern culture worships confidence. Social media teaches something exhausting. Be certain. Be bold. Never doubt yourself. Look strong constantly. Meanwhile, real humans feel fear. Real humans overthink. Real humans doubt themselves. Even strong humans, especially strong humans. Psychologists increasingly recognize something surprising. The people appearing courageous often still feel fear intensely. The firefighter feels fear. The doctor feels fear. The parent feels fear. The leader feels fear. The difference: they move anyway. Joshua embodies this beautifully. Pause there. Again. Notice something fascinating. God repeatedly says, "Be strong and courageous." Repeatedly. Why? Because Joshua needed reminding. Fear stayed nearby. This matters. Courage was not Joshua's starting point. Fear was, and perhaps this comforts modern people more than they realize, because many quietly assume, "He still feel anxious. Maybe I am weak." He still feel uncertain. Maybe I am failing. He still feel afraid. Maybe I should not do this. Yet Joshua whispers something profoundly human. Fear is not proof you are incapable. Fear is proof something meaningful stands in front of you. Psychologists call this emotional avoidance trap. People waiting for fear to disappear before action. Yet fear rarely disappears through waiting. Fear shrinks through movement. The first difficult conversation, the first therapy session, the first business attempt, the first vulnerable moment, the first leadership step. Confidence usually arrives afterward, not before. Joshua likely learned this slowly. Crossing Jordan afraid, leading people afraid, facing Jericho afraid, making decisions afraid. Yet somehow, step by step, fear stopped becoming final authority. Pause there, because perhaps that becomes deepest transformation. Not becoming fearless. Learning fear does not decide future. This matters for trauma too. Many wounded people secretly feel broken because fear stayed. The person betrayed struggling trust, the survivor struggling anxiety, the child of chaos struggling control. People assume healing means fear disappears. Reality feels gentler. Healing often means fear remains, yet stops driving everything. Joshua still likely doubted, still likely felt pressure, still likely missed Moses, still likely wondered if he was enough. Yet movement continued. This feels deeply hopeful, because courage rarely looks dramatic. Most courage feels ordinary, quiet, messy, uncertain. The parent getting up exhausted, the grieving person continuing, the anxious person showing up anyway, the leader making best decision possible, the person rebuilding after heartbreak. Ordinary courage. Psychologists increasingly emphasize this. Tiny repeated bravery changes identity. Not giant moments alone, repeated moments. One hard step, then another, then another. Joshua did not suddenly wake fearless. Years shaped him. Service shaped him. Failure shaped him. Waiting shaped him. Responsibility shaped him. And maybe this matters enormously for people feeling behind. People wanting immediate confidence, immediate healing, immediate certainty. Yet growth often happens quietly, slowly, hidden. Joshua spent decades preparing before people noticed. Pause there. Decades. This matters. Modern world rushes everything. Quick success, quick healing, quick transformation. But humans rarely grow quickly. Identity develops slowly. Courage develops slowly. Trust develops slowly. Could Joshua feel frustrated during waiting? Probably. Could quiet seasons secretly prepare him? Absolutely. This becomes one of life's hardest lessons. Preparation often feels invisible while happening. The years nobody notices. The struggle nobody applauds. The quiet growth nobody celebrates. Yet later, people call it strength. Still, Joshua teaches something deeper too. Comparison kills courage quickly. Pause there. Because Joshua could have spent life trying to become Moses. But history did not need second Moses. History needed Joshua. Different voice, different personality, different strengths. This matters for modern people, constantly comparing themselves. The parent comparing, the entrepreneur comparing, the creator comparing, the employee comparing. People secretly whispering, he will never be like them. Perhaps true, and perhaps okay. Psychologists increasingly recognize something healing. Identity strengthens when comparison weakens. People thrive when becoming themselves, not imitation of someone else. Joshua stopped needing to become Moses and started becoming person responsibility required. Maybe awkwardly, maybe imperfectly, but authentically. This feels deeply freeing, because maybe courage begins exactly here. accepting you do not need to become somebody else to become enough. Still, let us remain honest. Joshua likely carried fear for years, and perhaps that matters most. Because courage did not erase fear. Courage walked beside fear. This changes everything. Modern people often ask wrong question. Not, how do I stop feeling afraid? Better question, how do I keep moving while afraid? Joshua quietly answers, one step, then another, then another. The river looked impossible, still crossed. The walls looked impossible, still fell. The expectations looked impossible, still carried, not perfectly, but faithfully. And perhaps Joshua leaves humanity one final haunting truth. The strongest people are rarely people who feel no fear. Often, they are simply people deciding fear will not speak final sentence. Because perhaps courage never begins with confidence. Perhaps courage begins much smaller, much quieter, with trembling hands, uncertain heart, and one brave decision whispering, I'm afraid, but I will move anyway.